welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing the aftermath of number 1 Alabama going down versus Vanderbilt in what was one of the most exciting matchups that we've seen all season in terms of this college football. And just, I think this game, for it's a number of things that I think I have to say here, but I think most importantly, that's what I'm thinking about right now, is just how much games like this are a testament to the unpredictability of college football, but also the element of, although there are power schools and there are smaller schools, you just simply never know what's going to happen. And that's why you really do have to tune in every week, because there's just such a chaos to it. And I think that's what's really unraveling as we go into week 7 of college football now. A couple things that have to be said. I think first and foremost, I mean, it's definitely putting a lot of stress on Alabama fans, because you got to think about it, full circle too. Because I think for most important, I think if we're talking about from Vanderbilt's perspective, Vandy deserves a hell of a lot of credit for what they put out there. I think Clark Leah has always been a solid coach. It's been one of those things where everybody knew it was going to be a slow build in terms of really building that program back up, getting the right pieces in there, because for the most part, Vanderbilt hasn't really been too relevant since the days of James Franklin, and that was 10 plus years ago. So when you put this all together and you have a solid coach in Clark Leah, they brought in some transfers. They brought in Diego Piva. They brought in Jerry Kill. They have Tim Beck, who used to be Coastal Carolina's head coach, calling plays now. And it just seems like it's been all coming together for them. I mean, they played Missouri really, really tough last week, or a couple weeks ago. And then they also had that thrilling game Memorial Day weekend versus Virginia Tech, or Labor Day weekend versus Virginia Tech as well, which I was watching in full. Another great game to check out and watch on replay too. But in terms of this Vanderbilt team, I think it says a couple of things. I think first and foremost, obviously it's their first win versus Alabama since 1984, which that alone just deserves to be recognized too. And the thing about Vanderbilt too is I just rattled off a couple of those games that they played, but they've been kind of flirting with that chance of being able to really pull off an upset and get a legitimate, really strong win versus what was number 1 ranked Alabama too, who's going down to number 7. I'll talk about them in a second. But really, this win should be a testament to all the effort that they've put in, a brilliant game plan and execution that they put out there, and also you have a guy like Diego there, and maximize his strengths. I mean, I've watched him extensively at New Mexico State too, because Conference USA football tends to be usually either a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So if I don't have anything going on, it's always a good time to put on be able to support lower tier football as well. I highly recommend that. If you're free on a Tuesday or a Wednesday around 7-8 o'clock and you're not doing anything, go check that out. I think Florida International and Liberty are playing tomorrow, which I'll be watching in full too. So highly recommend checking out. But even at New Mexico State, everybody talks about the win versus Auburn, but even if you watch some of those games back against the likes of Sam Houston, Liberty, and New Mexico, and a couple of those other teams, a couple of things stand out about him. I think was also on display versus Alabama too. I think first and foremost, his creativity when it comes to his elusiveness, being able to escape the pocket, and always having his eyes downfield. That was the one takeaway throughout that entire game that I was noticing, was no matter what type of distress he was under, whether he was escaping defenders or whether he was getting hawked down by Alabama's linebackers, he was always looking down the field, and he was really good at being able to look through his progressions and deciding, okay, this guy's not there. Okay, let's go to my next read. Let me go to the guy in the flat. Whoever it is, I think it's definitely noteworthy that he deserves that recognition too. And for the most part, Alabama's defense too has been, you know, it's they've been to the point where they've been exploited in some ways, and I think Vanderbilt really took advantage of that, particularly I think through the rushing attack in many ways, because they did have a couple explosive plays that ultimately set up a big play action. Because even in the very beginning of the game, Vanderbilt marched down, have a nice 7 minute drive, and really put their foot on the gas quick. But I think where the momentum really shifted in that game for me was when they were down 20, when Vandy was up 23-21. It was 4th and 1 at about the 41-42 yard line. They run a play action. Diego or Pavia he does the play action. He looks up and he throws a nice 45-yard bomb to the end zone for what was a touchdown, and ultimately won him the game. But I think it just shows like how ballsy of a play that was, and it really shifted the momentum of the entire stadium, because as soon as they hit that touchdown, the crowd was electric, and it just felt like a different game after. I mean, yes, Vanderbilt was winning that entire game. They were up 23-7 at going into the end of the second quarter and everything. But Alabama came back, and even you hear a lot of the Alabama commentary too, or on ESPN. Everybody was just saying to themselves, okay, here's time for Alabama to turn it on, just like to turn it on and whoop Vandy. But that evidently did not happen, and Vanderbilt deserves so much credit for that win, and I'm so happy for that program and Pavia and Jerry Krill and all those guys. But in terms of shifting to Alabama, I think there's a couple things that you definitely have to address. I think, first and foremost, I don't think it could go understated that this probably is one of the worst losses for Alabama, if not the worst loss in their program history. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and go back and forth because, see a lot of criticism or feedback. Well, if Nick Saban was coaching, that would have never happened. But you can't deal with those what ifs, because at the end of the day, the game was played and the game was decided. You can't have what ifs of if Nick Saban was coaching, or if this guy was coaching, or if that guy was coaching. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere that he's won. Up to this point, he's done a great job, especially with being able to maintain a lot of the players that Saban recruited, to be able to keep them there. Yes, was there some turnover? Sure. But for the amount of guys that did actually stay, and then also being able to bring in guys to replace the guys who left as well, I think is definitely shows what kind of brand he's building for himself. And I think Nick Sheridan also is an underrated play caller too, who definitely used Ryan Williams to the best of his ability. He got Jalen Milroe being able to be athletic and be able to come up with some solid plays. I mean, yes, he did throw a couple interceptions, and Vanderbilt's defensive line really did a good job with trying to contain him as much as possible, and I think that definitely played a big outcome in the game, especially in certain situations where it was like a third, those 3rd and 5s, 3rd and 3s where Milroe wasn't able to get outside of the pocket and be able to scramble as much either. But in any event, I think first and foremost for this Alabama team, I mean, it's definitely a devastating loss. I mean, now they're number 7, but I think more than anything, when you look at this full circle, I mean, their season, if you were talking about maybe a 14 playoff, yeah, their season is over in the sense of, okay, the likelihood of them making the playoff is slim, and then you would have to hope that Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss and all of them are ranked below you. And Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, all those teams too. But in terms of college football at large, I think what really this Alabama loss is articulating, as well as the USC loss in Michigan and those games too, is, to me, it's really about the regular season not meaning as much as it used to back when it was just a 2-team championship or a 4-team playoff, which to me is it definitely is a little upsetting in the sense of, I'm not saying that one game should determine your whole season, but that's the way it should be, because you get to a point where to what extent will this Vanderbilt loss really impact them 2 months from now? Yeah, sure, we're all going to be talking about, oh yeah, I remember watching the game on TV and seeing the goalpost go into the Cumberland River, and that's great and everything. But where do you find that balance between, Alabama playing the toughest teams in the country, but also saying to yourself, well, they lost to a unranked Vanderbilt team who was pretty much at the bottom of the SEC projections all this entire season, and really pretty much including up to this point too. So with that said, I think it's just another example of the regular season meaning less to some extent, because when you add more of those playoffs and you have more of these upsets, the more we're going to see a 10-2 team possibly being within the top 10. Now, if that's the way it kind of rumbles, then so be it. That's the way it is. But in terms of long term, how college football is going to look, I think there is going to be more margin for error when it comes to Alabama having a significant upset or Minnesota beating Michigan. And like I said too, this is not to take away from any of those games, because Minnesota and SMU and all those teams, they 100% deserve credit for what they've done. All I'm saying is, in the grand scheme of things and talking about the landscape of college football as it is, and when you have these sort of upsets, the thing I'm always thinking about is, how is this going to impact the game at large? And the first thing I thought about was, it's example of, when you have that many teams in the playoffs, it's going to in many ways take away from the other teams of college football, as well as taking away from the bowl games, it's taking away from what happens in the regular season. And to me, the way it's always been, in my opinion, is what matters is winning in your conference, winning the conference championship, and then going on and winning a national title. But when you have this one game loss, I mean, Alabama, for them to not really get into the playoff now, is going to have to take a significant downturn to the point where you would pretty much have to argue that they just shouldn't be in it at all, or another devastating loss to an equivalent of that. But I think if you're Alabama, in the short term, you have to say to yourself, a lot of people were calling this a hangover, and I definitely wouldn't equate to that, because a hangover suggests that Vanderbilt just kind of got lucky, which I don't think they got lucky. I think they outplayed. I think they dominated the trenches. I think they executed their game plan to a T. And did they give up some big plays against Ryan Williams and let Jalen Milroe get a couple of touchdown passes? Sure, but when it came down to it, they were able to force Milroe to make a couple mistakes that ultimately cost him some points. Pavia was the leader that they needed in that moment, and most importantly, Vanderbilt lived up to the hype. They completely, dominated the game in the sense that they never let off the gas, and it's gonna be intriguing how Alabama turns into this next couple weeks, and in the sense that they have one of the hardest stretches coming up. And even when I previewed Alabama earlier before the season even started, one of the things I was kind of asking myself is, when Kalen DeBoer and his staff are legitimately under pressure and going to be under some scrutiny, how is he going to handle that? And I think for the Alabama fans out there, I think this could be a blessing in disguise, in the sense of maybe the Vanderbilt loss is the kick in the ass that they need to say, okay, this is the Kalen DeBoer era, and I'm going to completely just, start having the highest of the high, and this could be the lowest of the low, where we had our moment, we clearly didn't execute the way that we did. We gave up way too many turnovers, and it came to a point where they just simply got outplayed. And when it comes to it, hey, Vanderbilt came in, they played a chip on their shoulder, more power to them. But I'm definitely excited to see how Alabama bounces back from this. How are they going to continue to use those playmakers and Ryan Williams and a couple of those other receivers that they have, who have been consistent for them this year. And I think lastly, when you're Alabama, I think you have to ask yourself, what kind of defense adjustments are you going to make? I mean, because there are way too many instances where Alabama's secondary was just flat-footed and missing assignments and not communicating with each other, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, where it seems like they were misreading assignments. And I'm not gonna say sloppy, but I'm saying there were maybe some inconsistencies that they just couldn't really get things rolling in the way that they wanted to. So moving forward, if you're Vanderbilt, I say this is a hell of a win, probably one of the most exciting wins that you're gonna have in a long time, and live that high. But if you're Alabama, you say to yourself, hey, in this day and age, you have a 12-team playoff. Let the loss go. It's not the end of the world. But at this point, you pretty much have to play for an SEC championship, and you really can't afford another loss, because will Alabama get in with a two loss resume? I mean, it depends on who they would lose to in that second game and whether they make it to the SEC championship.